Yo, how's it going, man? Yeah, good. There's so much hype about this new SRAM transmission stuff. It's the mechs that bolt onto your frame with no little screws on them and these little funny pods under the bars. What's the deal?
Wow, as it happens, mate, I've been testing this stuff for 16 months,
Okay.
2,000 kilometers, and wait for it, 83,000 meters of climbing. And I tell you what, it's amazing. It shifts incredibly. It's bloody expensive, and I broke a derailleur, but I really think you should still buy it.
Al, I can see why you've not been answering my emails. If you want to see all the tech details about GX Transmission, head to the link in the description at bikeradar.com. But now, Al, you're going to give us a full review of GX Transmission. Cut to the chase, Al. Is it any good?
Yeah, do you know what? GX is genuinely amazing. Shifting performance, fantastic. Longevity, really good. 2,000 kilometers, mentioned it earlier. Rebuildability, something you don't see that often, also really impressive.
Okay, so that's replacing the cage and things like that.
Yeah, totally.
So because it doesn't have all the bolts and stuff, is it easy to install or is it trickier than previous stuff?
The first time you install GX, you're probably going to be scratching your head. There's no doubt about that. Even the best mechanics are going to be following SRAM's in-depth guide. However, once you've banked that information, it's so easy. There's only a few steps you need to follow. There's no faffing around with those adjustment screws that SRAM's removed on transmission.
I've definitely found that there are a couple of little tricks in there and a few little sneaky bits that you do need to make sure are there to make sure you get it running super smooth. But like you said, once you know, you know.
Yep, totally. And you can go on SRAM's website and you can actually check the compatibility for your bike. It needs to have a universal derailleur hanger.
Well, okay, so UDH. If your bike doesn't have this UDH, you can't use transmission.
Yeah, so UDH is SRAM's universal derailleur hanger. This is basically a standard across all bike frames that have adopted it, and it allows you to fit the transmission style derailleurs. And this uses a direct bolt that screws into the bike's frame.
Okay, now I've seen a lot of people who are like, oh, a new standard, oh, it's not fair. But actually, UDH is pretty cool, even if you're using normal derailleurs, because it's one derailleur hanger across every single frame that uses UDH. Instead of going into the shop and being like, oh, I've got this hanger, I need a hanger for this frame, it's literally one hanger for every bike that uses it. And that is kind of cool.
Yeah, totally. And it means you can fit this, which is awesome.
Wicked. All right, Al, so gears are never going to be good if the shifting isn't great. I am assuming that SRAM's GX Transmission shifts really well.
Yeah, so when it was launched, they had this whole spiel about shift lanes and shift mapping and all of these crazy things that they've kind of built into the derailleur. Actually, I hate to say it, and I'm not an industry shill, it's truly amazing. Like, the harder you pedal when you're shifting, the better it is. And you almost have like a redefining of how you change gears. You don't wait to shift like before the incline. You shift on the incline, in the middle of it, just as you're putting down all that power.
It does kind of feel like it was built for e-bikes, where you've got a lot more power going through and you can just bang up and down, can't you?
Yeah, and it's so crisp. It's so like satisfyingly crisp, and it clicks. Like, the harder you pedal, the nicer it clicks into the next gear.
Okay, I've heard a few people talking about how the shift speed can vary from quick to slow.
Yeah, now this is definitely an issue, and I think it's most pronounced when you're on the bike stand. So you put the bike on the bike stand, you shift dump, which basically you press all of the shifter buttons one way or the other in one go. And as you're pedaling, you will notice that the derailleur takes a while to catch up to the gear that you've selected. Out on the trail, now this is just my personal take, I reckon this is where you need to have like a redefining of how you ride. So when you're in the middle of your sprint, rather than like changing 3 gears at once, you change the gear when you need to, you go one at a time. So you're not like playing catch up heavy, you're not like dumping your gears and then trying to sort of talk through it with your pedal. You're just going boom, 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 1, 1, 1, change, change, change. It's crazy.
All right, so it is kind of different to like previous generation access and cable operated stuff. And my kind of take on the slow shifting is, you know, if you're sprinting in a more cross-country setting, that slower shift does take a little bit of getting used to, because you're kind of waiting for it to happen and you might overshift. I've done that a bit, but I'm a bit sort of slow sometimes. But on the previous generation stuff, yeah, it shifted when you wanted it to, as does cable. What's your sort of feeling on that?
I mean, I'm going to put it out there, I don't have quite as many watts in my legs as you, so I'm definitely not experiencing the same issues. I would say that it kind of focuses around miss shifts. So with a cable operated derailleur, if you don't quite engage that ratchet on the shifter, you get dumped back down into the previous gear. That's not possible with transmission. Equally, it's not possible with the previous generation access. But if you mash the shifter too many times on the previous generation access, it doesn't like it.
Yeah.
There's no denying that it doesn't like it. And you just do not have that problem with GX.
This really does shift like impeccably under power.
All the time. Yeah, totally.
So I know some real hard chargers have issues with chain slap with the previous generation access, and of course some of the cable operated drivetrains. Is that a problem with transmission?
So it's not completely fixed, but it's definitely significantly better. The B-knuckle, which is the main bolt, it can no longer rotate on the transmission derailleurs because it's like clamped over the top of the frame.
Okay.
This really quietens down chain slap.
Could it be better though?
It definitely could be better. The clutch tension on these is a little bit higher than the previous generation access bikes, so it's already quite a bit quieter, but it's not perfect.
Okay, so if you do think clutch tension is an issue, is there a solution? What's the answer?
Yeah, so there's definitely a few solutions. I think you could add a chainring damper to your bike from Rimpact or O-Chain, for example, to quieten it down. If that's not an option because of cost, I think you still want to be considering Shimano's adjustable clutch derailleurs.
Okay, they're a little bit better. You can go tighter on it.
Exactly, yeah. You can open the clutch mechanism and you can increase the tension on the clutch, and that really reduces chain slapping. In fact, it basically stops it.
Okay, for a quieter ride.
Yeah, totally.
Nice. And you've got a terrible reputation for being real hard on kit. Is it durable?
Actually, Tom, my reputation doesn't precede me in this case because that derailleur hasn't bent.
Okay.
The pivots are still tight. The jockey wheel's teeth are still sharp, and it still shifts like it did on day one.
Okay. And you can rebuild it. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, totally. So the outer parallelogram links and the derailleur cage, the clutch, and the jockey wheels, although that bit's kind of not surprising. It's mostly the outer parallel links that are like the impressive bit.
And the cage?
And the cage, but cages you can buy for other derailleurs as well. So, you know, I mean, it's cool that you can do it, but it's not like mind-blowing. In other derailleurs, you're definitely not replacing that parallelogram, whereas this one you are.
Let's be honest with everyone watching though, you did break the mech.
I did break the mech, yeah. Now, so worth pointing out, mechanically, it was fine, 100% fine. Nothing wrong with it mechanically, but electronically, it did fail. Okay. So I was out on a particularly wet ride, shift gear, nothing happened. I was like, oh, battery's gone flat. Had my replacement battery in my pocket, of course, like every responsible access rider should. Swap the batteries out, still didn't work. And basically I had to send it off to SRAM. And they said that the part that failed is an electronic part of the derailleur. This can be replaced. They could have replaced it. They currently didn't have any stock. So what they did is they replaced the derailleur for me. And this is actually my first derailleur that's been returned to me since with the new part attached to it.
So do you know what actually went wrong?
Details aside, no.
Okay.
Let's be honest. I think I can safely speculate there was a bit of water ingress. And I think this is basically what happened, is the water's got inside the derailleur and it gave up. Okay. The benefit is though that bit is replaceable and it's covered under warranty. Right. So if you're a consumer and this happens to you, you get your derailleur fixed or replaced, which, you know, you can't be said for many other derailleurs out there on the market.
No. All right, so the mech's pretty durable, but what about the cassette, the chainring, you know, the consumable parts?
Yeah, totally. So 2,000 kilometers. I'm going to keep saying that because that's a lot of time to spend on one single
He's proud of that one.
Very. You actually look at that right now, and except for the slightly weird chain wax that I've got on my chain, it looks pretty good. Yeah. Like the cassette's basically got no wear on it. The teeth are sharp, they're straight, there's no hooking. Importantly, compared to the previous generation SRAM drivetrains, there's no marking into the Eagle 52-tooth cassette sprocket where the chain's been dragged up it. That chain on my little chain wear tool, perfect still. Yeah. Unbelievable. I couldn't believe it. 2,000 kilometers, original chain. Yeah. However, if you notice, the chainring has got some significant wear on a few of its teeth. Now this is where the chain exits the chainring towards the derailleur at the bottom. And when I'm in my foot forward descending position, the chain's just slapping up and down on those teeth constantly. And what it's done is it's worn those lower teeth to complete stubs.
Mate, oh my God, that's insane.
Yeah, it's not good, is it?
I see what you mean though.
Really, even more importantly, however, performance hasn't been affected.
Yeah.
The chain doesn't come off. It's bonkers. Like the chainring looks basically destroyed around those teeth. Still like new.
Still good.
Yeah.
One thing I think to note is the chainring rollers are a different diameter to previous generation chains and also of course Shimano ones. So is there a compatibility issue with other drivetrains?
Yeah, you're probably not going to be fitting not even probably, you're definitely not mix and matching SRAM transmission and SRAM drivetrain parts. Okay. The only thing that's compatible is the shifter.
Yep.
And technically, and I think I've got this right, the chainring from transmission can be used on drivetrain parts.
Okay, donut Alex, SRAM.
Yeah.
What about things like wear on the cranks? Now, if you haven't heard, Al rode 2,000 kilometers on this, and I think actually more impressively, 83,000 meters of climbing.
Yeah, it's quite a lot.
Your cranks are pretty worn. On mine, SRAM cranks, they wore after the first ride.
Yeah, so I would say that GX is actually probably the most robust pair of cranks that I've ever used in terms of wear.
Okay.
They did wear after a few rides, but the wear subsided and has kind of flatlined to this kind of point here where you can still actually see some logoing on the cranks. Now for riders who have, who are flat pedal riders and they do put their feet on the pedals at a slightly strange angle, you're going to wear your cranks out. There's no two ways about it. I don't think you're going to wear the GX ones as much as other cranks in terms of my experience, but they're never going to look new, especially after how many kilometers was it?
Oh, let me think.
2,000, I think it was.
All right, so you're going to see GX Transmission on a lot of bikes out on the market at the moment, but who is going to be buying this group set?
First things first, someone needs to have that UDH on that bike. Okay. I cannot stress that enough. Do not buy it if your bike doesn't have it. Secondly, someone needs to be able to afford to buy the entire group set. Okay. Except for the Access rocker paddle, if you've got an Access drivetrain from your previous bike, you're going to need the whole shebang. So be prepared to spend some money. But the rider who's going to be buying this is someone who is genuinely after the most robust, the most repairable, and definitely the best shifting drivetrain, standard drivetrain without a gearbox, currently on the market.
That's a big, big claim. Okay, so we're going to say transmission, you prefer it to Shimano's mechanical stuff. Yep. But what about SRAM's more expensive XO and XX and I guess technically XXSL?
Yeah, so blindfolded, you couldn't tell them apart. Okay. If someone set you off on your bike and they didn't tell you what was attached to it, you wouldn't be able to distinguish any difference. So in terms of cost, performance, durability, weight and price and everything else, I think GX is probably the one.
Okay, Al, so I know that you like the shifter pod, but I'm going to put it out there, I'm not a big fan.
Why not?
Okay, so there's a few things. One, the buttons are less tactile, you get less feedback through them. I kind of don't really like where they sit under the grip so much, and there's a little bit less sort of adjustability with the Matchmaker clamp if you've got the SRAM brakes. However, I have recently got the little paddle that you can get, which is an attachment for them, and that improves it no end. So if you do have the little pod shifters and you're not getting on with them like I don't, you might want to upgrade to the little paddle shifter because it does make it a lot better.
I totally hear you, especially on the bridge clamp adjustment. However, I would say that the pod shifter for me wasn't SRAM trying to reuse the conventional shifter. They've totally reimagined the shifter for what an electronic drivetrain could be. And that's my take on it. You wouldn't have a car with an automatic transmission using a manual gear stick to select between drive, neutral, park, etc. in a gated kind of, crossway.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Hey.
All right, Al, so I think you rather like SRAM's GX Transmission.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, I loved it. It's a 4.5-star product. And if you want to read my full review, head to bikeradar.com. The link for that's in the description.
Excellent stuff. Now, if you want some downhill content, I went all the way to Fort William to ride the World Cup downhill course. It was a rather fun day out and you can watch that video here. But first, let's go ride.
Woo!